Okay, great. So hopefully my slides are back and showing again. So hopefully I will be able to step through. So, well, first of all, thank you for for inviting me along. And as we were just saying, yeah, the benefit of, well, there's benefits and disbenefits of how we sort of deliver these presentations. One of the benefits of this and the recording is that, yeah, as you say, people can watch it at their leisure. So if you are watching this and it's not sort of live and you want to pose any questions and things, we've got an email address at the end of the presentation, and we'd love to hear from you. So yeah, thank you for allowing me to come along and spend some time talking to you about healthy streets. So my name is, as it says there, is Richard, and I'm the Healthy Streets program director. So what I wanted to do out of today's session was really address some of these questions. So looking at what are healthy streets, why do we need them, how are we creating them, look at some of the challenges involved with that, a brief look at how you can get involved, and then really to have a sort of conversation at the end of the presentation to hear your questions and hear any of your points of view. Some of the things that we're doing are actually deemed to be quite controversial, and I understand and recognise that. So what I'm not here to do today is to try to sort of convince people or persuade people, if you like. My main purpose is to set out the rationale of why we're doing what we're doing, and to put that into some context. And then whether people agree or disagree with particular aspects of the program, because it's quite a varied program, that's for individuals to conclude, and we can have a conversation around that. But hopefully the presentation today will just give you a better sense of why we're doing what we're doing. So here's just a few photographs, a few examples of what we mean when we're talking about healthy streets, and essentially they're streets that have people at their heart. So what we want to do is sort of design streets and environments where we put people first. So however they travel, the people are our focus. And healthy streets are based on a set of established indicators. So the healthy streets indicators originate from sort of mayoral policy. I don't intend to sort of talk through the individual ones, but you can get a sense perhaps by reading through some of those, that again, it's all based on creating places that are good for people. And if we can create places that are good for people, they're vibrant, happy places for people to be. So a lot of our projects are all about trying to increase the score, if you like. When we look at streets, we can sort of make some assessments of how healthy it is, and our projects are around sort of increasing the quality of that assessment. So why do we need them then? Well, we have a growing population in London and in Enfield. So that is a challenge, and unfortunately more people probably means more cars, which means more driving, which means more traffic. And there are consequences of increasing levels of motor traffic. They can cause delays to businesses, but they can cause delays to everybody's journey. But in addition to that, there are a whole range of other impacts around air quality, around our health, both sort of physical and mental, including our exposure to road danger. We're in the middle of a sort of climate emergency, and there's also issues surrounding sort of equality and fairness. Not everybody owns a car. In fact, large percentage of the population don't, and so how we allocate that space and how we think about how we spend money on our streets should be reflective of that. So the Healthy Streets program is a long-term program. It's not a short-term thing, and it's got a range of initiatives, and we're looking really at sort of generational change. But the reality of the fact currently is that 39% of the borough's emissions come from transport. And so again, within the context of a climate emergency, we need to do something, I believe, to address that. Annual motor traffic in Enfield is on the increase and has been for a number of years. I mean, the pandemic has sort of altered that pattern, and it's difficult to understand at the moment what the what the trend will be going forward. But we're seeing many more motor vehicle miles in Enfield over the last over the last 10 years. We've seen that increase grow, and interestingly, and I hope these graphs are clear enough, but to just explain this next one, the sort of middle line, the yellow coloured line, is traffic on unclassified roads, and the top line is sort of A roads, and the bottom lines are motorways and B roads. So on A roads, motorways, and B roads, we've typically seen fairly static levels of volume. But as we've just seen on the previous slide, we've seen this massive increase in motor vehicle miles over the last sort of 10 years. And you can see that it's these small, often purely residential, smaller streets that have soaked up that increase in motor miles. And interestingly, that sort of increase over the last 10 years sort of aligns largely with the introduction of sat navs, and people rather than just sticking to the primary road, putting into their sort of car, well, what's the quickest route, and the computer telling the driver what's the quickest route, and that's led to a huge increase in motor traffic on roads that we would argue are not designed for that purpose, and that creates its own sort of issues and divisions within that community. So that's where all those increase in motor miles have been soaked up from. So just to consider some other things, we think that that we really want to broaden the amount of choice that people have got when they come to consider how they want to move around. 30% of Enfield's car journeys are less than 2 kilometres, and 60% of those car journeys are less than 5 kilometres. So some of these journeys for some people can be travelled in different ways, and if we can encourage more people to choose alternative methods for some of those shorter journeys, that does free up the roads for those people who it's not an option to take those alternatives. But in order to enable people to make that shift, we've got to provide good quality alternatives to car travel. And interestingly, car ownership is one of the strongest sort of factors that lead to inactivity, and 70% of people without a car do some activity compared to 50% with a car. And as well as a climate crisis, we do have a particularly within our young people, we have an obesity crisis as well, and the issues that generates for those young people throughout their life, and the pressure that puts on the NHS is another unsustainable pattern, unfortunately. And if we look at some of our town centres, what this picture is showing is in those sort of rings, if you like, how far you can get out in 5, 10 and 15-minute walking catchments. So depending on which town centre you live, you start to see actually within 15 minutes walk, which again is not doable for some people, but is for many. You can start to sort of cover a reasonable distance. If you then look at that in terms of cycling, then within 10 minutes of cycling, you can cover vast areas, fairly large areas of the borough in actual fact. And this sort of links to a concept that people may or may not have heard of. It's sort of a relatively new thing that's been discussed in planning circles. This idea of the 15-minute city. So what this sort of principle is looking at is and I think the pandemic brings an interesting sort of dimension to this as well. Is how can we design places, towns, or cities, but wherever we live, so that many of the things that we need on a daily basis are within 15 minutes walk or cycle. And if we can start to sort of create those environments, then we can equally reduce the demand on people traveling longer distances. With the increase in home working because of the pandemic, perhaps we can increase the amount of local co-working spaces. So again, people are not having to travel as far to work. Potentially, again, won't apply to everybody. How can we, let's look at how we can develop our local businesses and town centres so that we can bring more vibrancy and diversity to our local businesses. How can we support our local businesses more by walking and cycling to our local shops? When was the last time perhaps you supported your local parade of shops? You know, what entertainment can we have that's local? We've got wonderful parks within the borough, so lots of people are sort of have access to a park. So this how can we retrofit, if you like, to a certain extent, this notion of a 15-minute city to the places where we live, so that car journeys are not essential for every journey. If we turn and look at policy for a moment, then you'll see, and you probably hear on the news, there's lots of talk about climate change, and there's lots of talk about, I think maybe it sort of jumps out to me perhaps because this is my line of work, but lots of discussion around how we travel and the climate emergency, as I've said. So within sort of policy circles, there's local policy at Enfield that suggests that we want to increase the levels of active travel. That's people walking and cycling and supporting people to use public transport more. And the converse of that is of course to hopefully to encourage people to use their cars a little bit less. But that policy exists London-wide. So there's the London Mayor's transport strategy, which has this target for 80% of journeys to be sustainable by 2041. And I think there's, again, I think there's within the context of a climate emergency, I think there's a discussion to have about that. 2041 seems a long way out, and that was a target that was developed back in 2018, and maybe there's an opportunity to reconsider that. But also the government are bringing forward clear policy and investment in encouraging more walking and cycling. So there is, in policy terms, there's sort of complete alignment that this type of thing is the right thing to do. Of course, then exactly what you do and how you implement it is up for discussion. But as I say, here we can just see London policy, Enfield policy, and government policy all pushing people like myself in one direction, and that's to help encourage more people to walk and cycle for some of their journeys. And I suppose you could ask what the alternative is. I mean, this photograph's taken from the States, so forgive me, but just this idea of the roads are congested, we need to build more roads to allow more space for traffic, and that philosophy and that approach, was in existence in the UK for a number of years, and we've expanded the road network. But the question is, if you allow more space for more cars, then what do you get? And I think often the answer is you get more cars. So perhaps now I think is the time where we consider, well, how do we enable people to travel around in different ways? So the program brings together a whole series of different components, if you like, that knit together to generate this sort of longer term change. And some of those components are lots of people like, and some people like and some people don't, and and some are more controversial than others. So the program is broad, and we are doing lots of different things, and there's different views on that. But I'll give you a flavour of some of the things that we are doing. So one of our focus, which I think is welcomed by a lot of people, is working in partnership with schools. So we've introduced last year, as part of the pandemic, we introduced 12 what we call school streets. So this is where we close the road outside schools at opening and closing times. Again, can have some challenges in certain areas, but that's this sort of project has been very well received, and is something that we'd like to look to make permanent and indeed expand. And starting with young people, I think is focus on young people is really important, so that we can instill this type of thought process in them at their early age, so that they're starting to think about how they travel around, so that they can then take that with them through life. I might have just missed. No, I haven't. Sorry, my keyboard is just also what many people have seen is sort of the introduction of cycle infrastructure around the borough. There's just sort of a few images showing a few different projects, and again, you know, less controversial now, I think, but quite controversial at the time. We probably started this about 5 years ago, and what this is about reclaiming some of the road space and rebalancing the allocation of that space, and saying, look, we need space for motor vehicles, but we think it's right to have some safe space for people who choose to cycle as well. And we need to then, over time, as we build a network that coherently links together, and as we encourage more people to try this, we'll see cycling numbers grow. So they're very modest at the moment, but again, over time we should see that increase. And we've, you know, the thought process is that unless you create the facilities and the safe space, you'll never see that increase, and motor vehicles will continue to dominate. But it's important that those facilities are accessible for everybody of all ages and all types of bicycles or cycles or tricycles or cargo bikes. And but there's some other interventions that we're doing. I'll mention our quieter neighbourhood program, or low traffic neighbourhoods, as a lot of people refer to them, where we've actually started to close some residential roads to prevent that cut through traffic through residential areas, who are going from A to B and don't have a destination within a residential area, but are choosing, or it's been suggested to them through their sat nav that they cut through that area in order to get to their destination out on the other side. And what we're saying is we're running some trials to say, well, let's have a look at preventing those movements. All roads remain accessible by a motor car, but the routes might be slightly different to get in and out. And if we can do that, can we create a whole network of small residential streets that are suddenly much more safer for walking and cycling? And if people are cycling potentially on a longer journey, that enables them to connect via these quieter neighbourhoods to some of the cycling infrastructure on some of the more main roads that we've just seen on the previous slide. And there's other things that we need to do to make it convenient and to start to introduce this as a more natural choice. And one of those is making sure we provide places for people to park their bikes, and that's both at their destination, so in town centres, or maybe a train station. As an outer London borough, I travel into central London quite a bit, but I don't cycle all that way. But I do use the train to get in, and I cycle to the train station. So how can we introduce that sort of what we call those multimodal journeys, where you may travel one journey using different means? But it means cycle parking at home as well. And one of the things that we've been introducing are these cycle hangers on residential streets, so that people, particularly people who are perhaps living in blocks of flats or terrace stock where there's lack of access to gardens or lack of storage facilities, can secure their bicycle safely on the public highway, you know, on the streets in front of their houses, in the same way that many people store their private cars on the public highway outside their houses. So bringing some balance and equity to that approach. We're also looking at some much larger projects. So I don't know whether any of you have been involved in our Enfield town sort of regeneration project that we're in the process of sort of developing designs. But how can we create more vibrant town centres? And as part of that, how can we incorporate making sure they're accessible, and that we're encouraging people to arrive at those destinations by walking, cycling, or public transport? And we feel that can make a more attractive, pleasant high street and town centres, and encourage people just to visit more, stay longer, spend more, and contribute to the vibrancy of our local town centres. And we're also hold a range of events and partnerships to try to support the community in trying out more active forms of travel. But this work is not always easy, and there can be tensions, and there's things that we have to focus on. And I just put some of those here on the page are some that I think are often are certainly in the forefront of my mind, but perhaps in other people's minds as well. And one of those is the emergency services. So we have a very positive and collaborative relationship with all three emergency services. I personally meet with them fairly regularly. But what we've got to do when we're introducing these schemes, particularly if we're sort of restricting access or restricting routes for general motor vehicles, is working with the emergency services to make sure that they can continue to get the access that they need. We also need to, think carefully about issues of equality. I've discussed that in a couple of different contexts, but we need to, be really careful and really consider the needs of people with more limited mobility, who a car is a primary mobility aid and is essential to their day-to-day activity, either for them or perhaps for carers who are coming in to help support them. So that's something that we've got to work through, and as we make changes, there can be some challenges, some tension there. And how we monitor these projects as well. So we have to take an evidence-based approach to the data that we're collecting, and I think that links to then how we're communicating both about the program as a whole, and what we're doing here today is part of that, but also how we're communicating on individual projects, and how we are explaining to the community and to residents in particular areas who are impacted by some work that we're doing in clear and simple terms, what we're doing, why we're doing it, what we're proposing, and how they can get involved and influence the development of a particular plan in their local area. And yeah, working how we communicate as a department, and the council as a whole is an ongoing challenge, and there's always more I think we can do to help improve that. So just as I finish off, just some thoughts on ways for people to get involved. There is cycle training that's available and accessible to all ages. So that's something that people can book. We have previously had a scheme at Bushhill Park, which has had a whole range of different types of cycles, which can make that's the start of that journey a little bit more accessible. That scheme has been paused during the pandemic, but we're in active discussions about how we can sort of resurrect that. And there's a whole range of other events, and we've currently been working with Age UK as well, and supporting them in some cycling activity that they've been interested in doing as well. And then there's this Let's Talk platform. So we have an engagement platform called Let's Talk. If you were to Google Let's Talk Enfield Council, you would find that. I can provide a link though. And that's there's a whole range of different projects listed on there, and ways that that people can either participate and or find out more information about some of the individual projects. And I firmly believe that when we're trying to bring forward a new project or a new idea, the more engagement we can have, the better we can make that scheme. And that engagement is often not about whether we should do something or not, but how we should go about it. What should that design look like? These are our aims. We want to do something. We're going to do something. We're going to try something in some instances. So we've been doing a lot of trials of late. Let us hear your voice about how you think that trial should be developed. And when we've implemented that trial, let's hear your voice about the changes that you think we should make to it to make it the best that it possibly can be, as we try and balance everybody's needs. And to finish, that's a good email, for the whole team. But I'm really sort of interested, if we get chance, in exploring perhaps ways that we can work with this forum. And is there something specific that we could do together? I don't know, but I'd certainly welcome ideas on that as well. So that concludes the presentation, and I'd now sort of welcome questions or just comments, observations, so that we can have more of a conversation about some of the things that I've covered, and potentially about some of the things that are on your mind that I've not touched on. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Richard. That was, I guess you just drop your slides. I don't know, or Chris, you drop his slides?
I can do
Richard
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we are. That's good. Okay, so has anybody got any questions? I can't see any of the hands up in the... Oh, I can see Monica's put her hand up physically. I think we'll go with that.
Okay. I'd just like to say that women on their own feel much safer in a car that they can lock rather than public transport, pickpockets and muggers, and not many older people cycle. And we need to socialise, so we need to get in our car and go out and meet people. I'm just speaking as a woman on her own. And it was safer to drive during the epidemic rather than use public transport as well. And a lot of my friends have to drive quite a long way to get out of their street to join the traffic jams on the main road, which contribute to extra pollution. Our street where I live, our hedgerows have been left to become overgrown with weeds because the gardening budget is being spent on all these fancy little displays elsewhere. So there we go. And you haven't touched on the litter. I suppose that's not in your remit at all.
Okay.
Healthier streets mean to me clean streets.
Okay, thanks, Monica. Yeah, I mean, if I respond to a few of those points,
Yes.
so yeah, I think everybody's safety, and how they feel about their safety is of course important, and so different people will make different choices, and that will influence those choices. I mean, I would, I think there are. What we need to do as a council is we need to be making sure our streets are adequately lit at night. And again, if we've got safe places for people to cross, that's all part of that. But it will obviously depend on the nature of your journey. And for some people, for some journeys, they'll feel that taking the car is the safest option. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I drive as well, and I cycle, and I use the train, and I use the bus, and I walk. So I make different choices of how I'm going to get around depending on the nature of the journey that I'm going to make. And I think all we're saying is that we need to have a little, more of a mix of different transport choices. I think in terms of people of all different ages cycle, and I think well they do, Monica. I'm sorry. There's young people cycle, older people cycle, people of all ages cycle, and I think some people are of the perception that age is a barrier, and in my view it isn't, in the same way that disability isn't either, and that's something that we've got to help get better at communicating and creating opportunities for more people to try that out. Now again, it might not be for everybody, and that's fine, but people shouldn't think that they're of an age where cycling is not possible, because I personally don't accept that's the case, and other people in the group, I can see some nodding their heads might want to say that. In terms of hedgerows, so yeah, the council should be maintaining its hedgerows. It's not correct to say that those budgets have been cut to enable other schemes to take forward in terms of schemes within my area. All of the projects that we're currently delivering are funded by external investment, so money that's coming direct from Transport for London or actually from the Department for Transport during the pandemic, and so we don't use any council tax receipts, so any of the funding that comes through that avenue for the projects that we're working on. So people shouldn't think that because we're doing this, investing money in these type of interventions, that we're not spending it on something else. That's not the case. If we didn't spend it on these interventions, another borough or another part of the country would spend it on those type of interventions, because it's transport money from transport organisations. I agree that litter is an important part of creating or not having litter. Having clean streets is an important part of creating a place that's nice and pleasant to live. And when I think of healthier streets, I agree. I also think of clean streets. So again, the council, is doing a lot to keep our streets clean. There are some issues in some locations, and what I'd encourage people to do is use the sort of reporting mechanisms that the council's got in place, because that's the best way to enable the council to then target its resources to the areas where it's most needed. So they're just a few thoughts in response to some of your comments. Yvonne, do you want to? You're on mute, so
Sorry, Tony, if you go next, and
Yeah,
then
sure.
Sylvia, and then Chris.
Richard, I thought that was an excellent presentation. I'm really right behind you all the way in the initiatives that are being taken, and I think that's vital for the future of society. With and the climate change obviously at the top of the pile, really. One of the things that there's I feel would be done to extend the schools issue is to stop traffic around schools for dropping off. And I would have thought that if you introduce something like a ban on parking in those streets around schools from 8:30 to 9:30, that would encourage that would be within walking distance and for people to get to school, so it would avoid the school's rush hour that you get around Enfield. And I guess we all experience that if we're in cars. I feel that something like that would help. It would reinforce the blocking off of streets that or the initiative that you've already done. So I think it's vital that we do this. One of the other things that I'd like to see is an initiative to get people using electric bikes, and any initiative that the council can introduce to help in that direction would be very much appreciated. I'm certainly I ought to invest in the electric bike. To I know Chris has his electric bike, and he travels all around the borough and beyond the borough. So I think initiatives of that nature will be very helpful to all of us, and particularly it would improve the life, reduce pollution.
Okay, thanks, Tony. I mean, in response to that, I think we've got. So I mentioned this school streets program. So we've got. We originally had two schools that we delivered just before the pandemic, where we closed the school, and that's essentially what happens. I think it's from about 8:30 till 9:30, about what you say, and then the same as the school closes. And then last year we introduced 12 more that we're doing experimentally, but we've got over 100 schools, so there's a tremendous amount more that needs to be done. And I think you're right that needs to be a focus. We're working and we're sort of reaching out to the schools. It's something that's got to be done in partnership with the school, and we really look for the support of the head teacher. So it's not something the council imposes. We want to work together, because that's the best way of success with those things. And there are some schools where it's probably just not practical, because there are, depending on where a school is located, and the impact that might have on the sort of wider network, there are some schools where it'll be even more of a challenge. But I do think there's much more that we can do at schools, and I think we've got to focus on that. In terms of electric bikes, we've been discussing. I absolutely agree. I have a couple of bicycles, but one of them is electric. And when I've got the kids on there, that's easier. And interestingly, I think we didn't touch on that before when I was sort of responding to Monica. But I think again, e-bikes can enable cycling to be accessible to a broader demographic of people, and this sort of notion that you've got to be 100% healthy is fit fit middle-aged person is I think e-bikes can help overcome that. So I'm talking with colleagues, and I hope that in the not too distant future we can bring forward a scheme that will help residents perhaps try out an e-bike and see whether it's right for those. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for more information on that.
Good, thank you.
Sylvia? We can't hear you, Sylvia. You don't appear to be on mute, but we can't hear you.
I'm not on mute, no. Can you?
We can
hear
hear
You
you
need to
now.
speak up, closer to the microphone, yeah.
Okay. It's just that local high streets and roads have been run down as far as businesses are concerned, and it's no longer possible to just go to the local parade of shops to get everything you need. It involves us going to supermarkets and so on. When I was young, I've lived in this area all my life, and when I was young, you could literally walk to the Cambridge in 10 minutes and you've got a butcher, a baker, greengrocer, whatever. And that's no longer the case. There are so many sort of betting shops. Now there's a gambling place up in Palmer's Green. These sort of shops which are no use to people for everyday shopping.
Yeah, I agree that I think that decline in some of those the butchers and the bakers, and the sort of supermarkets becoming more dominant as one-stop shop places is a challenge. I think we need to work to do what we can to reinvigorate both our sort of town centres and our more local shopping parades. And the council, again, I work with my colleagues in economic development and other departments, and what can we do to encourage more business. And the high street's never been in a sorrier state post pandemic, and that's a real challenge. But I think if people are starting to work more locally, and are needing more local, less of a sort of influx of people potentially into central London, how can we support some of those businesses? And I do see quite a few coffee shops and things opening. I understand the bakers, and I've forgotten the name of it now. Whole Whites, is it? Is opening another branch in Palmer's Green, which is sort of super positive to hear. So yeah, it's not quite how it may have been. But I think that makes it all the more important to support those local businesses that we do have that might be near to us, and also thinking perhaps about how we maybe shop more frequently, buy less and shop more frequently. There can be a link there to sort of waste reduction as well, which is important. But yes, I appreciate what you're saying. It's a challenge.
I think business rates are pretty high in our borough, aren't they?
Well, business rates are outside the gift of control by the council, so we collect them, but we can't set them. So that's not something that we can, unfortunately, that we can influence or certainly control. But there are other things that we can do, and I do think that you talked about them being run down. I think improving the quality of the public realm, as we call it, that the environment around them is a key part and key thing to do to encourage more people to use them, and that's something that is within our gift.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a challenge. But
I'll just bring up another little point that was just brought up about the school streets. I live very near to Oakthorpe Primary School, which was made a school street during the pandemic. And it absolutely needed to be a school street because it's a cul-de-sac, and people were driving there, little tiny ladies with these huge SUVs that they could barely see over the steering wheel, and having to do a 3-point turn at the end and putting children in a lot of danger. It really needed to be done. However, there's a knock-on effect that we now have a bigger problem with people parking across our drives without asking, and we can't get off our drives. People have been late for hospital appointments, work, so on and so forth. It does have a knock-on effect, and a lot of these people are pretending to live in our area but don't actually live in our area. They're giving someone else's address so that they can get the child into the school. And that really does need looking into. We also have enforcement officers appear from time to time, but don't actually ticket the cars that are offending. I actually had an argument yesterday with a woman who was parked across the dropped pavement where the children are meant to cross to go to school, across the end of Checkers Way from
Yeah.
Tottenham Hall Road. And she sat there for 2 hours, over 2 hours actually. Blocking the road was extremely offensive to me, being very rude, when I said to her that that was very dangerous, and if her child was injured or worse because someone else had done the same thing, making them have to cross the road somewhere that was less safe, how would she feel? And she just couldn't have cared less. That's
Yeah.
where I want to put my car, and it's none of your business, sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry you experienced that, and again, I agree that you know, that as we bring forward these type of things, that there is the potential for those issues to sort of be displaced further out, and you know, it's not the first time I've heard of concerns around some of the school streets of them people, you know, parking inconsiderately and blocking drives and things. So that is something that we do need to tackle. There is a number that you can call to oh, you got that, good. Because and again, it doesn't mean to say that they can always respond. The like any, you know, the enforcement team is very stretched. We've got over 100 schools, so at that time in the morning it's very challenging, but we've got to, you know, we've got to keep working at that, because we don't just want to displace those problems out. So, you know, I think it will take time. Yeah,
it's very frustrating when the officer is actually there and can see the
yeah,
offence being caused, is being done, and doesn't put a ticket on the car. We're
yeah,
told when they park across our drives we have to phone in, which is
yeah.
fair enough, but when they're on a double yellow line by a mini roundabout on a drop curb, you know, what proof does he need? We don't have to phone in about that. That's a traffic offence, isn't it?
When was that? Yesterday, you say?
Yesterday morning. I've actually written into several people, councillors and various departments. I've emailed them yesterday about it. So Elaine Barnes and the traffic and parking people.
Okay.
And so on.
Okay, well, if you've raised it that way and through your councillors, then you know, with the relevant team should respond back through to the councillors, and hopefully that, you know, then pass that on to you. So I was going to sort of look into it myself, but thank you for taking the time to write in about it, because I agree. I mean, there may be some circumstances that I'm sort of not clear on, but yes, that sounds particularly frustrating. So we'll look into that.
Okay, I'll be quiet now because I've taken a lot of your time.
That's good, Sylvia. Chris, you wanted to ask a question or
yes.
make a.
No, well, the question I wanted to ask: do you ever feel a sense of total despair? The structure of Enfield is peculiarly car-centred, and the pattern of settlement is dispersed, and you know, obviously it's a sort of the death of the high street is purely a result of, almost purely, I mean, admittedly there is internet shopping now, but I think the effect of that even wouldn't be critical. A result of the ease with which people can use their motor cars. There's no, and where do we go from here? The structure of Enfield is set up for unhealthy living. The most you can do is tinker with things a bit. Yeah, and now they're sort of talking about expanding out to Chase Farm, and there's all this stuff, you know, the plan. That's all going to look like more Brookside closes. The way that this is just not a way for humans to live. What can, I mean, and there you are, you know, trying a little bit to do things, but despair is what I feel.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that, Chris. You asked me whether I ever feel a sense of despair, and the answer is no. I have a strong sense of hope, and you know, I understand what you're saying in terms of particularly outer London is much
I'm talking
more
about outer London,
car centric,
yeah.
And you know, a lot of the transport system, as you're sort of probably alluding to, is sort of designed to get people into the centre of London, either through buses or through the tube work. And so an outer London like Borough, if you want to go east to west, that via public transport, that can be very challenging. But it's not that bad.
It's not that bad in Enfield. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that the world that's now constituted means that people do this weekly shop, for which they go to this god-awful area to the east of the, in whatever it's called, where the factories used to be, where everyone worked. Those graphs of yours show that this is not stopping. It's still going. The car traffic, despite the fact that the levels seem to be totally impossible, it's still going up.
But that's why I think we've got. And I'm not sure I accept your suggestion that we're tinkering. So
I'm sorry, I'm being I'm being provocative. But
well, that's fine. That's fine. I think, but I think it will take quite some time for us to piece together a whole coherent set of measures, and until a lot of things, whether it's sort of walking, but particularly cycling, you can introduce one route, but it has to form part of a coherent network that has to be developed over time, because you've got to work, you've got to go on. Yeah.
My point is, it's deeper than that. It's land use. It's the fact that people in Enfield, particularly in the west of the borough, occupy far more land than they should. And this means that we're below a critical density that is required for civilized living. And the sort of living that supports walking and cycling and moving. Fair. I mean, all right, you have to hop, if you don't cycle like I do, you have to hop on a 307 to go from the east to west of the borough, but so what? It's no big deal.
Well, I think that, and you've sort of, again, you've alluded to it, but the local plan, of which there's some controversy as well, is
that making things worse or better?
Well, that's for you to say through the consultation in terms of what your view is.
Well, it does seem to me, I mean, on the face of it, to be making things worse in that it's expanding the habitable area of what is already an over-dispersed borough. Yeah,
well, I think there's an element of that, but that's where you get the balance between creating more density where you can, and how dense do you want to make it, and then depending on your answer to that question means maybe you need a bit more space depending on how dense you want things. So it's a huge and the local. So it's outside of my area, but the consultation is open. I think it's about to close actually.
It is,
So do put your points into that. But I take your point. We have to take this long-term view of how people travel and how people move around. And yes, the data is showing that the number of motor miles is going up, the population's going up. We're at crisis point, and that's why sometimes, and I think the pandemic has perhaps accelerated that a little bit. Maybe we need to get a little bit bolder with the type of things that we're trying, and so everything that we try might not work. But we've got to take some action to change the course that things are currently on.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Is there anyone else who's got a question that they? I mean, one thing I might ask, Richard, is it's often the case, isn't it, that this whole idea that you fix something in one area and it simply moves to another area. You move the drug dealers away from this place A and they move to place B, and you move the traffic away from A and it goes to B. It's that sort of thing that it's very hard to. You've got to reduce it in total, not just move it around. And like the same with the schools, as they're saying, you can clear the area outside the school, but then you've got the bits either side that are simply impacted and get all the same bad effects. It's a huge issue, isn't it?
It is, and I think what we've got to do is we've got to start somewhere. We've got to make some changes, understand what impacts those changes are happening, and then where necessary adjust. But then expand the area that we're covering, and over time, address the core of the issue, which is an unsustainable amount of sort of motor miles covered, when a good chunk of those could be traveled by another means. And until we can redesign our environment to enable people to choose that alternative, we're just going to keep going in the same direction. So, but it will be, it has the potential to be a bit of a roller coaster along the way.
Yeah. Derek, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I think it's quite unrealistic to imagine that people aren't going to want their cars. The idea of building 100 flats on a station car park without parking, I think is just crazy. All those cars are going to be littering the streets, and what is needed is large car parks so that people don't have all the houses that can't have their cars parked in their drives because they're terraced houses almost on the street. They're all in the street. So if they had a car park nearby where they can park their cars, that would be more sensible. And to imagine that people are going to buy flats or even rent flats, 100 flats without car parks,
They will.
quite unrealistic. They have their children who get to 17 or 18. What do they want? They want their car. So,
well, young people are not buying cars in the same way that we might have done in the past. I mean, I don't think anyone's saying, Derek, certainly I'm not, that suggesting that everybody should get rid of their cars. I have a car and I need it for some journeys. But what we are saying is that, do I need to use that car for every single journey that I make? And how do we want to use the land that and the space that we have available? And personally, I showed you the slide of the freeways just chock-a-block full of cars. The more space, the more you accommodate the provision of people owning cars, then you're likely just to encourage more people to have cars. If people are living in, particularly in more town centre locations where they've got access to good public transport, they're young. You take a borough like Hackney, less than a third of Hackney residents own a car. Now we're an outer London borough, and so so that we might not be at that point. But there's already a third of the people within Enfield who don't own a car. So not everybody owns a car, and we need to facilitate helping people make choices that we think are better for the community, for their own health, and for the long-term prosperity of the future generations. And I think sort of redesigning our space and how we allocate that is all part of that conversation. And I'm not sure that providing more car parks to enable people to have more cars is really going to get us to where we need to be. But that's my opinion, and we're all.
I think there've been suggestions because I live opposite Avenue development, which is the same. There's a huge amount of it's old council housing that they're redeveloping, and they don't have car parks. And their argument there was that that people won't have their own cars; they will just share cars and use, because it's a complete waste, because most of us have our cars on our driveway for 23 out of 24 hours or whatever it is. And that you can then just call up cars that were electric, driverless cars that will turn up and take you places. I think we have to accept that's probably some time away. Sorry, Tony.
Yes, Richard. A good example of the sort of quieter streets is in Winchmore Green. I'm not Winchmore Hill Green. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but they blocked off a little slip road.
Yeah.
And so now the green is whenever you go past a green, there are people having coffee and the rest of it. So it's been a real improvement.
Yeah, and I think it's been so that's just one of the sort of that type of scheme sits within our sort of program of work, and I think not only has it created a sort of a more sociable and environment, but it's been really quite important to the ongoing sort of viability of those businesses during the pandemic, when you've not been able to sit inside, or because of government regulations, or indeed maybe still now, particularly as it's so beautiful, where people feel much more comfortable being outside. I think, was it Yvonne who was saying she'd been through Soho last night, and the changes and the vibrancy that's brought to streets, and that I think goes back to sort of where I started, I think, which is about how can we have a focus when we're thinking about how we design our streets on people, and how can we put them at the heart of our design, as opposed to the convenient movement of motor vehicles and how we can most efficiently facilitate people to get around by motor car. That was an old philosophy, and we're moving into a new way of viewing things, which is people-centric, people-focused, creating environments that are best for places to create the best places for people to live in, and healthy, active places where people can move around, safely by a whole range of different means. But that's not trying to squeeze out the motor car, but it is trying to sort of reduce the overall number of journeys.
It sounds very laudable, doesn't it? This, as you say, it's not that people don't agree with where we want to go. Some of it is how do we get there and how long is it going to take? And you talk about the schools starting, don't you? Start with school children, because if school children don't start cycling to school or walking to school, then, you've almost lost the argument, haven't you? If you don't start young, then they don't get into the pattern, or start using buses. Or I'm always amazed that teenagers of 17 or 18 are being dropped off at school by their parents. I mean, I'm just absolutely shocked that they'd want to be in a car with their parents and nothing else at that age.
So is there anything, if I can ask a question back, is there any, just as we come to close, I guess, but is there anything that you think that I and my team, we can do more working with the Over 50s Forum? And maybe you might not have immediate ideas, it might be something that you want to think about, but it would be great to sort of, work more closely with you in some way. I don't know what that might be, but I don't know whether anyone's got any initial thoughts on that.
Yeah, Tony.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement with you, Richard. I'm in the forum. I've been secretary for 20 odd years and now taking a backseat. But I'm sure the forum would love to get involved with this sort of activity. We're already involved with supporting NCAF, the climate change group in Enfield. This is, I think, this is equally important, and it's important not just for our perspective, but for our family's perspective. What's going to happen to, if we don't take action to reduce the use of carbon fuels and reduce the impact on our roads. It's a dreadful thought, really. The inheritance that we're passing on to our families. Anyway, my point is the forum, I'm sure, the committee would really endorse joining you in any way in which we can help this your project.
Yeah, I agree, Tony. I think that obviously, and especially like the safe and the quieter neighbourhoods, less traffic neighbourhoods, LTNs, that lower traffic, that they're quite controversial issues, and our members, got pro, some are for, some are against, and you can see, especially if you're in the outer areas. So it's something that we want to engage with the council in many ways anyway, and this is something that's very specific and very immediate. So I think it's something that we will have a discussion and come back to you on that, I'm sure. But thanks very much for your time today. It was very valuable. As I say, we'll put it on the website, which I think, the recording on the website, and if you can send me the slides as well. Sure. And then we can put that up, and I'm sure that will generate more interest, and we'll come back to you to look at other ways of working. So unless anyone else has got anything they want to add?
Perhaps those slides could be distributed to the people that attended this meeting.
I think I'll put them on the website.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's probably, I'm just going to say, else we, figure out who they are. Okay, well, thanks, Richard, and we'll be in touch, I'm sure.
Thanks, guys, and thank you for your inputs. Thanks very much.
Okay, bye.
All the best. Bye-bye. Bye.